Of course, Washington State and Oregon State want to join the Big 12, and there's some allure there. But Utah, schools like Utah, don't want any piece of it. This is Locked On Big 12.
You are Locked On Big 12, your daily podcast on the Big 12 Conference. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Happy Friday, everybody. Welcome to Locked On Big 12. I am Drake Toll from America's #1 Big 12 podcast, Locked On Big 12. Thank you for making this show your first listen every single day. That is JT Wistersill of Locked On Utes. Today, we'll go over how Utah does not want Washington State or Oregon State in the Big 12 right now. We'll also cover how Clemson is being overvalued as we speak. And would Utah ever actually leave the Big 12 conference? Let's put a rest to that rumor. JT, off the riff here. Utah, for BYU, we learned last week, BYU wants Washington State and Oregon State. They get it. They were in the independent, no man's land for a long time. They have a heart for Washington State, Oregon State. Utah spent a decade in the Power 5, and now they're still in the Power 4. It feels like if you're from a Utes perspective, I get why BYU wants it. If you're a Utah, what's the point in having Washington State and Oregon State in the Big 12?
I think you said it best when you talked about the heart for BYU, because if I look at it from an emotional standpoint of more so, I feel bad that Oregon State and Washington State in everything that happened with the Pac-12 were left behind. I feel like that was wrong for them to do. But I can also come in here and say, I just don't think it benefits the Big 12 and Utah much to add them. I think it's too many teams, and I just don't think look, number one, I don't love expansion as is anyway. I'm not a fan of just continuing to grow and grow and grow. There are certain brands. If you could add, I know we're going to crap on Clemson in the second segment, but that's a big name, a big brand. Like that would elevate the Big 12. That makes sense. Washington State and Oregon State, I just don't feel like they would elevate the Big 12 with their addition. Therefore, I don't think it's worth it. Oregon State and Washington State, they've been some really strong teams in the past. Oregon State had a really good year overall last year. Washington State started hot, then really cooled off. But both those programs look like they're going to take a step back now. I just don't feel like there's a reason to add them. And I'm not a fan of, look, we already got 16 teams, right? I'm just not a fan of 18 teams for 2 spots in the conference championship. I just think that's where we get to too many. I honestly think 16 is already too many. But then again, if it wasn't 16, Utah wouldn't be in the conference. So that's where it's kind of a double-edged sword there. But I think it's too many. I don't think, once again, that they are a major addition. It's not like, oh, Washington State and Oregon State, this is an addition that elevates the conference to the next level. So that's where I feel bad for their fans. But because it doesn't make the Big 12 better, in my opinion, that's why right now I would say I'd like to hold at 16 unless a big ACC brand becomes available.
There were 40 teams in this past season that cracked a 4 million viewer standpoint in a game, and Washington State was one of those. They were number 41 in the country when it comes to viewership overall. They averaged 1.08 million viewers per game. When it comes to Washington State, they bring in viewers, and they've got a lot of the Seattle market too, and Oregon State brings in good football now, right? The last 2 decades, you wouldn't say that was the case, but recently they've been good. How much of this, JT, is almost I don't want to say gatekeep necessarily, but for Utah, you made it out. You were one of the brands of the Pac-12 that got to survive and join a conference like the Big 12 that's in a better shape than the ACC. Like, you're Cal, you're in a tough spot right now. Utah's in a solid spot in the Big 12. Does it feel like, hey, we made it out. We made it out. And if Washington State and Oregon State don't, even though we were conference mates, there's not really a reason for you to care.
Yeah, like I said, it just goes back to I don't think they boost it. Maybe you could make an argument that had they been able to hold on to Jonathan Smith, right? If DJ Uiagalelei was coming back for another season, right? Like, there's a lot of factors where last year I felt like they were on closer to a footing. Heck, Oregon State beat Utah. Washington State, back when the two teams faced off against each other in 2022, nearly beat Utah. So it's not that, but I just feel like because of the change now, this is already passed, right? One team got selected, one did not. Utah is going to remain where they are. Oregon State and Washington State are going to fall back a little bit now. And because they've fallen back and they're not a stronger band, it just, like I said, it goes back to, I just really don't like the continued growth and adding of super conferences. And I know in many ways that's the world of college football, but I just feel like 18 is too many for a single conference. I don't know a single other sport that would have that many teams in its regular season. 12 are, in some ways, you could even say 12 felt weird to then only select 2 teams to go play for the conference championship. But even if that slightly felt weird, it's a lot different than when you get to all the 18. I just think it's too many. I think the time zones, the travels, everything, I just don't think they're additions that move the needle, such as, which you already mentioned, Cal and Stanford in some ways, right? ACC added those schools, and yet it feels like they're in the worst position, right? So that's where, once again, I feel this isn't even as much to me about Washington State and Oregon State. It's more so just a matter of adding teams, unless they are of that level that a Clemson, a North Carolina, the top tier brands in the ACC are. So I don't have any ill will towards those schools. I feel bad that they got left behind, but the truth is they got left behind. They have lost out on some of their best recruits now. So they are not, if Utah were to play either of these schools this year, I think Utah would win both games pretty handedly. If you want to make an argument, Oregon State would pull off the upset because it's tough to play there. Sure, I could totally get behind that. But I just think with the current roster that Oregon State and Washington State are fielding, I think they would really struggle. And I think they need to kind of build their way back up if they want to earn an opportunity to get into a conference. And right now, I just don't feel like it benefits the Big 12 and Utah to add them.
I do find it interesting from a valuation standpoint. A lot of times we look at TV numbers. Washington States are on par with Oklahoma State, Arkansas, sitting around West Virginia. Washington State's actually ahead of Kentucky, North Carolina, Texas Tech, South Carolina, Mississippi State. Hold on now. Kansas State in football viewership numbers, and way ahead of UCF, Houston, Cincinnati, and even Baylor. They are trumping Baylor by 27 spots in the rankings. Arizona's down there 2 way past them. So from that standpoint, hey, wait a second. Maybe if we're only talking TV viewership, there's a chance that Washington State could segue its way back into the Power 4 here pretty soon. Coming up, a team that I don't think it deserves. And coming up, a program that I don't think deserves as much love as it's getting, the Clemson Tigers on Locked On Big 12, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's show is brought to you by eBay Motors. eBay Motors keeps your ride or die alive. I love eBay Motors because not only does it keep my ride or die alive, it, you know what? Actually, it's a perfect way to put it. Alive is the right word. My car is barely that. It is sitting outside right now, my 2016 Nissan Maxima. You'd think 2016, it's fine, right? I don't change the oil as often as I should. And there are parts that are hanging off of it. I go to eBay Motors and I say, eBay Motors, I have this part hanging off. I don't have a rear view mirror anymore. I knocked it off. And eBay Motors has superchargers, roof racks, and exhaust kits. So, of course, they have rear view mirrors. 122 million parts for your number one ride or die. eBay Guaranteed Fit means the part's going to fit. eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit, only available to U.S. customers. That is eBay Motors. JT Wistersill of Locked On Utes. Clemson has been in talks with the SEC, the Big Ten. I think we're overvaluing them in those two conferences. I think we are overvaluing, and here's the reason why, balloons. Here's the reason why.
Balloons, that's why.
Look at Miami, okay? In 2003, they are where Clemson is today, where everybody looks at them and says, that's the program. Like if you're out of the ACC, if you're going to go to expansion, that's the program. Today, Miami could end up with the Big 12 because they just didn't have the brand power that everybody expected. They sucked for a little bit. For Clemson, 15 years ago, they were making less athletic revenue than Bowling Green in football. Their revenue was lower than Bowling Green because they weren't very good and no one cared. And South Carolina was carrying the torch. If they are bad for 5 years at football, for 10 years at football, they're not going to be a valuable commodity like a Florida State, a Texas, an Alabama, an LSU. Those are schools that if they suck, they still make a whole lot of money. Clemson doesn't. Brett McMurphy's brought up the idea of Clemson in the Big 12. I don't think it's going to happen, but I think anybody who adds Clemson is making a mistake because the second they suck, they're not going to be valuable anymore.
Okay, I'll disagree with you there. I think they would add a lot of value to the Big 12 because I think they have the potential, as we've seen.
Yeah, to the Big 12, sure. I'm saying that I just think they're being so overvalued right now.
Yes, I think in many ways, the recent Clemson success hasn't been fantastic. And I'm curious how good they're going to be this year. That's kind of where I'm sitting at, where I'm like, I think I've seen them in the top 10 a lot. Like, can I see it with Cade Klubnik first? And I'll also say this about Clemson. I think these are two different discussions, right? You're talking about their value for Big Ten and SEC. And I mean, I understand that, but also in some ways, like I'd rather have them than UCLA. So that's where we can do that whole brand discussion thing of that nature. But let's talk about the Clemson team we're going to see this coming fall. I will say I think they might be a little overvalued because I see them in the top 10. This comes to us from Athlon Sports. They have been an AP preseason top 10 team the past 3 years, but finished no higher than 13th in the final poll during that span. And Cade Klubnik's back yet again, who also in that same Athlon piece, he finished 80th in QBR. So I got a lot of concern still with Clemson. I know that defense can be really good, but offensively still feels like they need a few things to click. And I will also say this. If Dabo doesn't get with the transfer portal, I'm not saying you need to bring in an entire new unit somewhere, but Utah's done a really good job of plugging in bits for when guys depart. I think you need to utilize some of that. And if Clemson doesn't get with some of those times, maybe they do fall all the way down to where you're talking about, where they're not appealing to the Big Ten, the SEC. But to me, when you have the potential to win big there and at the highest level and carry that high ranking next to your school's name, I still think they carry value to be added to a conference.
For an SEC, you bring in Clemson, and then they stay. I mean, for me, what separates Clemson from Mississippi State if Clemson has 5 bad years? And the question really poses itself because South Carolina is in your state. I don't understand. People keep saying, "Oh, there's no way Clemson goes to the Big 12." I would love to have them in the Big 12. That rocks. That's good. It's same reason I'd love to have Miami. I don't think Miami is a true power in college football like an LSU or even an Auburn who is up there. Clemson's had really good, like Jeff Fuller has put together the EADA numbers the last 6 years. They've been great. Looking back 20 years, Clemson's kind of an afterthought because when they are bad, nobody really pays to see them. They don't generate the same revenue. It's not good. If you're the Big 12 conference, I want to shift it to Miami. If you're Utah, you like Miami, you like Clemson, but I don't think that you like. I don't know if I get it. I don't know if I get Clemson or Miami to the SEC or Clemson or Miami to the Big Ten. Because again, in a year where in a 5-year stretch where Clemson's bad, what separates them from a good Utah team?
I think that's fair, but also say this about Clemson. You talked about when they were bad, people didn't pay them as much attention. But they have won those recent national championships, and that does still carry value for them as a big brand. That's something that is going to be sustained and maintained is when you look back and say, hey, they've won recent national championships here. And I think Dabo's still going to be there for a bit. I expect them to remain. And even though they haven't been great, they've still been inside a top 20 team like that. I do not think they belong with the brands that you listed up there. LSU, even in Auburn, I think it's fair to throw in there, right? But I do think because they've won those recent national championships, I just have a hard time seeing them falling all the way back. Like each year, I expect Clemson to be ranked inside the top 20 still, even when they have a disappointment. And as I said, I don't think they should be ranked inside the top 10 going into this year. I still think they will continue to be good. And I think they'll have a chance because of that winning tradition and the ability of when you get the right people in there to win big. I think they would still add value to a Big Ten, to an SEC, because they have that history of being better than the likes of Mississippi State. And yes, Drake, you're right. Maybe it wouldn't work out for them when they enter that conference. But it's gone really well for them overall when they have broken through, won some national championships, made it to the playoff, had some big performances. And I know Cade Klubnik didn't work out, but they still got a strong history of quarterbacks and other elite players that I think they can bounce back in some other years and add some recruits. So I'm banking on that recent tradition to keep them relevant, even if they did navigate to a new conference.
I think it's funny that in the Clemson conversation, they really sit. I don't know if irrelevant is the right word, but they have made less money in the last 20 years, revenue-wise, than Indiana, than Duke, than Virginia, than Minnesota, who Louisville and Kansas are above them. You just think, oh, that's not good. Again, the 20-year sample size for Clemson is not great. In the 5-year sample size for Clemson, or even 6-year sample size for what they've done, there are still schools that you're like, oh, I wonder, like, why isn't Clemson making as much as Indiana or UCLA or Kansas? It's just the question. It's the big question mark for me. Do I want Clemson in the Big 12? Yeah, I do. I wouldn't mind that at all. However, do I think that they carry enough weight that the ACC should be swayed by their decisions and schools should be swayed by their decisions? I don't. And you mentioned this kind of off the top of the show about who the Big 12 should add. There are the NC States, the Louisvilles, the Pitts, even maybe a Miami that I think would become valuable commodities in the Big 12 conference. I think moving forward, you turn your attention to them, less so than a Clemson, understanding they go to the Big 10 or the SEC, but also understanding that those conferences might one day regret that decision. Coming up, JT, let's talk, would Utah ever leave the Big 12 conference? Because everybody loves to say that's going to be the case. Here on Locked On Big 12, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's show is brought to you by FanDuel. FanDuel is your number one place to go place a bet. I love sports. I love them. I don't want them to stop. Playoffs winded down. We're stuck with baseball now. Baseball's fine. I work in baseball. It's all right. But there aren't as many sports going on. So what do? I go to FanDuel and I put a little money on baseball. This summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day all summer long. Head over to FanDuel.com/locked on. Start making the most of your summer. FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. You go in, you say, I think the Texas Rangers are going to win today. Or maybe even smarter, I think the Oakland Athletics are going to lose today. And then what you do is you open up the app, dream up bets anytime that you're in the mood. All customers right now, FanDuel.com/locked on to start making the most of your summer with boost or bonuses daily. FanDuel.com/locked on is where you go. It's FanDuel.com/locked on. JT Witzer still of Locked On Utes. There has been this constant rumor mill, almost constant rumor the last 8 months of, Utah's going to leave the Big 12 to go to the Big 10. Kyle Whittingham doesn't want to be in the Big 12. There was the talk when Whittingham was like, I don't know if we're playing BYU in 3 years. Expansion's crazy. I've mentioned this moniker so many times, Crazy Uncle Kyle. And not a bad thing. Mike Gundy's the same freaking way. It's Crazy Uncle Mike. Is Utah a Big 12 team to stay, or is there always an open book there for the Utes to try to jump ship?
I think there's definitely a possibility that Utah could leave the conference to answer the question. I'm sorry, but if you would have asked people from Utah 2 years ago if they'd ever leave the Pac-12, they would have said no way. And then they left the Big 12. Like Kyle Whittingham, you called him Crazy Uncle Kyle. I got to defend my crazy uncle here a little bit. Okay. I think there's some truth to what he says, because the truth is we don't know what's going to happen in the college football. What if an opportunity becomes open in a super conference? I don't like super conferences. I already said that, but I do think Utah would be dumb based on the trend that college football is going towards to not try and jump on that ship. I just think it's a matter of the situation. And I think that's why if it does become available, that's where Utah should go. If it becomes, hey, some of the other biggest brands are being allowed into these conferences and Utah is an open invitation, they should try to get on one of the last lifeboats just like they did when getting into the Big 12. I don't want that to happen. I hope Utah stays in the Big 12 at this point. But if we get to that point where we're going to get super conferences, then Utah's going to have to jump ship like that. I mean, they haven't even played an official snap in the Big 12 yet. So as excited as I am to be in the Big 12, you can't speak of Big 12 loyalty when you haven't even really been through anything yet if you're Utah.
I just, I get it. BYU, Cincinnati, Houston, like they all come in like, oh my gosh, so happy to be here. You've rescued me from the doldrums of college football.
Happy to be here. I'm just keeping the facts.
And in Utah, it's like, I get it. I do. I understand that Utah knows its worth. Know yourself, know your worth. That Utah wants to be in the best spot possible moving forward in college athletics. I just don't, I don't think Oklahoma State is saying, we're keeping our options open here. We're at least keeping one eye open. I think the commitment is to keep the Big 12 together. And for Utah, is the commitment to keep the Big 12 together, or is the commitment to make sure Utah survives? And I think, look, there's an easy answer. I will answer it for you. It's to make sure Utah survives. I get it. You want to live. You don't want to be Washington State. But do you really feel like it's that realistic that Utah would not be a Big 12 team in the future, that it should be that thought is on the table?
I think that thought is definitely on the table that 10 years from now, Utah's not in the Big 12. I definitely think that's a chance. I also want to push back on something you said. Drake, in some of your past jobs that you've had, you have been happy for stretches, right?
True.
And then you eventually left those jobs. So it would have been crazy for you back then to say, I would never leave this job or this position. Utah is happy in the Big 12 right now, but I can't come on here and say, with the title in the description that you have listed over here is, would Utah ever leave the Big 12? And the answer to that is yes, there is a strong possibility that Utah could, because none of us know exactly what's going to happen in the future of college football. So it's absolutely a possibility that Utah could leave the conference. I hope we stick with our 4 conferences. I mean, crap, we already talked about the ACC and what a mess everything's shaping up to be over here. So who knows what the futures looks like? I don't want super conferences. I already said that. But also, I have to live in the reality we're in right now and say more change could very well be coming. And that's what Kyle Whittingham said. You call him crazy for it, and maybe it won't come to fruition. But there's a really good chance it did, because I never thought I'd be sitting here on Locked On Big 12 talking about Utah as a Big 12 school. And here we are.
True. I call him Crazy Uncle Kyle in an endearing way. Like my crazy Uncle Kyle. Like every time he says something, I'm like, oh, yeah, it's just my uncle.
You actually have an Uncle Kyle?
No, I don't. Kyle Whittingham is like, he's my now adopted. I have adopted him.
He rides around on Harleys. He's a cool uncle. As
my uncle, right? He has the Mike Gundy to him, or the Dana Holgerson of like, that guy's just, that's just a dude. Guy's just being a dude. The alliance that you did, the allegiance, that's the word, that Utah has to the Big 12. Does it know a timeline? Like if the Big 10 calls next week and says, look, we need 4 teams in a package here. We need Pitt, we need Miami, or we need Clemson, we need Florida State, we need Utah, we need Colorado. You got to say yes to that, right?
I agree. I think you have to, because as I said, I'm
the Locked On Big 12 host. Like, let's be honest about it, right?
I think the Big 12 is doing everything they can, even the things I don't disagree with. Like, I don't love the naming rights thing, but they're trying to generate some extra couple million. And D, are you a big fan of that?
Why don't you like it?
Because in my personal opinion, there are some things I wouldn't put a dollar figure on. And I think your name is one of them. I would not put a dollar figure on the name of the conference. I think there should be pride in the name of the conference. Just like there was something to be said about playing in the Pac-12. There's something to be said about playing in the Big 12. I don't like saying the All-State 12. I just think that just shows that we're willing to do everything for money. And I understand in the world of college football, most things are for money. Name is just like the one thing. And I do not want that to stretch down to colleges where Utah becomes Utah Gatorade or something, like some brand or name of that nature. But before I throw it back to you, because I can tell you're itching to get in, Utah would be crazy to not go to the Big 10, because the Big 10 and the SEC are clearly in the best position of the 2 conferences to remain at the forefront of college sports.
This sounds asinine. It does. But it's what I'm about to say. Okay. It is effectively what we're staring down the barrel of. Someone offers you $50 million, $100 million, in the Big 12's case, $1 billion+ and says, change your name from JT Wistrcill to Trevor. Oh, I am buying the keychain that glows and says Trevor. Like, I can't wait to change my name to Trevor and never work a day, or like just do whatever I want for the rest of my life. For the Big 12, if you get $1 billion, $2 billion, whatever it is private equity stake in a name change, that makes you so much more valuable and makes Utah a lot of money. I just don't. People scream SEC. Recruits say, I want to play in the SEC. Nobody really screams Big 12. If it means that each of these schools makes $10 million extra a year, every 2 years, every 3 years, I think at that point it's worth it.
Okay, so a couple things. Number one, you're right. $50 million for my name is an insane amount of money. But let's also go back to this. That's equating it to what I currently have now. $50 million would be more than I'll ever make in my life, right? For Utah, $50 million it's big, but it's not like they will never see that in life. And also I'll say this, I don't think that Utah, based on the numbers I saw millions in the original report from Pete Thamel. I saw it would generate millions for school. So like,
it would be you being the Big 12, less Utah, but you are the Big 12. You're not just Utah. You're the Big 12. You're
getting you're just getting a couple. If you're being an individual, like as a member of the conference, like if I'm only getting a little bit of that, if I'm not getting a crazy amount of sum of money for that, that's where I don't think that I don't like the name change idea, because it's not an earth shattering amount, only a couple million more. If it was 50 million more, I will say, I'll go back on what I said a little bit. Everything has a price. If it's 50 million for me, I couldn't say no to that number. That's too much money. Yeah. There's too much good I can do with it. But that's not what's been reported in this instance. And for a few more million, I don't think it justifies changing your name, especially when it doesn't change that much compared to the Big Ten and the SEC. Things will still be the same. This extra few $1 million will allow them to get a recruit or two extra, but I don't think it allows them to keep pace with the Big Ten and the SEC, who are only going to continue to have those amounts of monies. I just don't think it's a big enough and drastic enough change to justify it for the Big 12 rather than for little old JT Wistersill.
Speaking of JT Wistersill, where can folks find you?
You guys can head over at Locked On Utes, follow my personal handle at JT Wistersill on X, talking all things Utah football, sports in general. Always fun, even in June, to talk about whatever sport what's going on in the world of sports. As you said in the FanDuel read, right, Drake, there's not a ton going on in the sports world right now, but still always a good time, and always have a good time when and chop it up on here with you, my friend. So thank you for the invite.
JT Wistersill, Locked On Utes, Drake Toll, Locked On Big 12. This has been and always will be. Thanks for making it your first listen every single day. Locked On. Thanks again for making it your first listen every single day. Dose Grande.